Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz pianist, keyboardist, and composer Russell Ferrante. He opened up with us about his latest 2021 CD, Inflextion, with his trio, and a wonderful existence in the world of jazz. He was born in San Jose, California, and started playing the piano at the age of 9. His early musical experiences revolved around the church, where his father was the choir director. He moved to San Francisco in 1975, where he continued to be active on a very vibrant local music scene, and he landed his first teaching job at the Community Music Center in the Mission District. And to this very day, he continues his grand 40-year association with the Yellowjackets, and he's also performing and conducting clinics around the world. Enjoy his story.
Good to speak with you.
Hey, good to speak with you. I think I caught you with the Yellowjackets a few years ago at the Folly here in Kansas City.
Okay. Yes, we've played there a few times. Great venue.
Man, that seems like a million years ago, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I appreciate you taking a minute out.
Yes. Thanks.
You bet. And then, so I want to talk to you about your new trio album, Inflextion. It's a wonderful album. Talk to me a little bit about, it's coming out during the pandemic. Did you have any thoughts on the timing of this coming out?
It happened to coincide with this period of time. It was actually recorded over, I want to say, like more than a year's time, but off and on. And then it was languishing. And I think it was just the very beginning of the year that the drummer Steve Schaefer, whose studio we recorded at, said, we really should finish this thing off. He was very much the driving force behind us actually completing the project. So in the beginning of January, we booked a couple days and finished recording everything and mixing. And then I believe it was the end of January of 2020 we finished. So it's been like it took about a year for it to arrive. After mixing, some period of time went by. We were trying to figure out, should we put it with a record company or put it out ourselves? And then actually, do you know Jim Haslip?
I know the name, yes.
Yes, he was the bassist in Yellowjackets for many years and a wonderful friend. He has worked quite a bit with Joseph, who is the owner of Blue Canoe, and he suggested, why don't you approach him about putting it out? And that's what we did. And then it takes a few more months for the wheels to turn and get the artwork done and mastering and all the rest. But that's the long answer to your question. It was really in the pipeline for quite a while before COVID hit. But the one thing that's kind of interesting in terms of the title of the recording and some of the artwork and so forth, that took place during 2020. I kept hearing inflection point. Everyone was saying, that the pandemic had really created this reckoning and things were going to change from this point forward. And I was curious about the deeper meaning of the word inflection point, and I found that it means to change direction or to bend in. And I thought that the music had a more introspective quality, and it also was definitely a change of direction from music of Yellowjackets, which, if anyone knows my name, it's probably through being in Yellowjackets. So it seemed an appropriate title. And then my neighbor is an artist, a really fine artist, and a musician also. And he had this. I told him the title, and he had volunteered to create some cover art, and he created this beautiful piece that based on the title, and it seemed to work really well. So all the pieces kind of came together, in kind of mid 2020.
Yeah, that piece is wonderful. It has some Picasso feelings to it. It's really cool. Yeah, it's totally cool. So it seems like you guys have a really good, fluid, comfortable conversation as a trio. How do you feel? I mean, obviously, it's a high quality recording and you wouldn't have put it out if you didn't feel like that was the case. But how do you ultimately feel now that you can sit back, you know, we're going through this time, maybe things are getting a little better, maybe you can see live shows. How are you feeling now?
I know all of us are anxious to play again, of course, and prior to this, the release of this recording, we played a few gigs a year. Both Steve and Michael live locally, and they're really busy. They're pretty in-demand studio musicians, but we have a few kind of regular gigs, one at a church, and there's an arts festival down here that we've played several times. So we've been playing, but, you know, it's always been a little bit of a sideline because I'm traveling with Yellowjackets and I teach at USC also. And then Steve and Michael have really busy studio musician careers. So this has always been something that we did just for the love of it, and we never aggressively, you know, tried to really beat the bushes for gigs and so forth. But I know we would like to do more playing now as a trio, maybe a little tour somewhere. But again, we're not aggressively going after that. It's been an interesting process just to see how the music was received, and it's been gratifying to see that it's been getting some airplay on jazz radio stations and kind of climbing up the jazz charts. I think we started at 300 and, you know, we've made it into the 20s now. I think we made it into the teens. We'll see. And I don't know what the prospects of playing live. If there's some demand and interest, we would love to do that.
So let's dig into a little bit of your life. You're from San Jose originally. You started playing piano at 9. Talk to me a little bit about your childhood and some of the influences that got you into jazz.
Yeah, well, I started, my early musical exposure was all through church. My dad was a choir director at the church we attended, and my mom played piano, and she also played violin. Just, you know, she had played in school. She wasn't a professional musician, but she was very musically inclined. My dad was a singer, and he was in a gospel quartet, and he directed the choir, and he was a soloist. You know, he sang at umpteen weddings and funerals and various church events. So I always heard music growing up, and around age 9, my folks decided to give both my sister and I piano lessons, and I studied just classical piano for about 8 years, and toward the end of that time I was introduced to jazz music through friends at school and was bitten by the bug, so to speak, and started really pursuing learning about jazz music. I would take a few lessons with different musicians in the Bay Area, up in San Francisco and in San Jose, and then get books on my own and listen to recordings, and am basically self-taught when it comes to jazz music. I never studied in any kind of academic setting, but there was a lot of musical activity in the Bay Area. Some really fine musicians, a lot of kind of R&B oriented music, blues, and jazz. And my first real professional gig was with the blues singer Jimmy Witherspoon. And that was through guitarist Robin Ford, who was the person who later assembled the original members of Yellowjackets. So I was going to San Jose State, I would do a couple semesters, drop out, get a gig, play, go back to school, get another gig, leave. And I think I eventually finished like 2.5 years of college. And by that time, I was playing pretty much full time. I moved to San Francisco and met a lot of wonderful musicians up there, and had continued my friendship and musical relationship with Robin Ford, who had moved to Los Angeles and was he had gotten a record contract and was touring with well-known people. So I came down to work with Robin, and that's when I met the other members of Yellowjackets, Jimmy Haslip, Ricky Lawson, our original drummer. And that was the late 1970s, around 1978. You know, from that point on, you know, music, like almost every other occupation, relies on relationships, word of mouth, friendships, recommendations. And I was here in Los Angeles, and it was a really there was a lot of vitality in the music scene, especially then, you know, before people had home studios and didn't need other musicians. You know, you would get an opportunity to meet all kinds of people doing demo tracks for various people, and it was a really fun, invigorating time.
Talk to me a little bit about the very first live show you saw that made you think, that's something I would like to do with my life.
That's a good, all right, so let me think back to that. Well, I remember in high school, I don't know that this made me want to be a musician, but it had a really big impact on me. I saw a double bill of Jimi Hendrix and Chicago at, I think it was the Oakland Coliseum. And I just remember, you know, whatever, how many tens of thousands of people packed into this huge arena. That was kind of overwhelming. But in terms of jazz music, you know what it was? And it wasn't probably anything anyone would know, but there was a local musician in San Jose, and his name was Clifford Coulter, and he's still alive, and he actually made a couple records on the Impulse label, I think in the late 60s. But he was an organist and a pianist and an incredible musician. And I would go with other friends to see Clifford playing around town, you know, little restaurants and bars and stuff. And he was a really inspiring musician to me. And that was definitely one of the catalysts for my interest in music. And then also, around that same time, I first saw Robben Ford play, and that was at a little pizza parlor in San Jose, and he was playing, he had a blues band, but he would play traditional blues, and then he would pick up alto sax and play Coltrane and Archie Shepp and Ornette Coleman tunes on alto, and that blew me away, and that was something that really inspired me. So those two people, I would say, Robin and Clifford Coulter.
Why do you love jazz?
It's like I figured, or I've thought about it, I think it's like a calling, you know. It's because when I first heard the music, I didn't intellectually or analytically know anything about it, what it was, but just the sound of it intrigued me and appealed to me. It was a real sort of a natural response I had to the music. I think one aspect that I did love and had a great affection for was, you know, the more groove-oriented and blues-oriented part of the music. And I think maybe that was from hearing like spirituals as a young kid, hearing that music and being very drawn to that. After, I think I was intrigued by the harmony and the just the freedom of the music. The first recordings I heard, like jazz recordings, were the first one was live at the Les McCann and Eddie Harris live at Montreux Jazz Festival, and there was some really well-known tunes, Compared to What, and Cold Duck Time, these kind of R&B, sort of gospel-y, funky pieces. And then at the same time, I was listening to Coltrane's My Favorite Things. And then I got a recording. It was kind of a Miles Davis greatest hits, a lot of stuff around My Funny Valentine and Four and More, that era of Miles Davis. And I mean, I had no idea what that was, but I just loved the way it sounded. And I can't tell you why, but it just, I was drawn to it.
As we kind of get reflective here on your life, if you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger self, around the time you were becoming a professional, and you could give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would have been to study music in school and study like the classical literature, orchestration, conducting, composition. Those things are really difficult to learn on your own, and I've managed to piece together some amount of information to allow me to have done some of those things, but I wish I had studied in school and really had a solid foundation in like the classical literature and, being able to conduct an orchestra, being able to look at a music score and hear it in my head, those really deep skills that take years to cultivate and experience. So I would have urged myself to stay in school. And just at the time, as a young person, I just thought, well, I want to be a jazz pianist. Why do I need all this other information? But when you're young, you maybe can't anticipate what opportunities will come your way and what you're going to need to know. If I could go back and redo it, I would have made some different decisions around that.
When we do return to live music, when things kind of start opening up and getting back, what do you hope we all realize about the power of live music?
Well, I think we'll appreciate, the obvious, just the connection with one another and sort of the, the fellowship or the being able to share that feeling with others. I mean, I know I speak for a lot of musicians and probably in music fans too, that miss that kind of energy and excitement that you have at a live concert, because it is an exchange between, the musicians on stage. They're communicating with one another, but they're being fed by the audience, and this big circle of energy is created. And I certainly miss that, and I think people will really, people are craving that. And also, another aspect of playing music, at least for the Yellowjackets and other situations I've been in, we always make a point to make ourselves available after the shows to meet people in the audience if they have CDs that they want signed, or they maybe have a story about the music, what the music has meant to them. I mean, we've heard some incredible things through the years, and just being able to make that personal connection with the people that appreciate the music is really it's valuable and poignant, and I miss that, and I'm really looking forward to experiencing that again.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
I think, I guess maybe first and foremost, probably my identity is as a musician, but my priorities are my family, my wife, my daughter, my grandchild, my sister and her family. That's a really important thing to me. I've been married over 40 years now. We're getting ready right now, my wife and I, to take a cross-country trip. We'll be driving to Boston, where my daughter and her family live, and we haven't seen them, in over a year, so we're really looking forward to that. So that's, a big part of my identity, a family person, but also a musician and a teacher. I've been teaching at USC for 22 years now, and I really value the opportunity to work with young musicians and hear what they're into and just offer some help and guidance. So that's another part of my identity. And then, of course, we all are citizens, right? We have a responsibility to our communities and our neighborhoods. I try to, live up to that standard as well, active, trying to help out other people in our communities. So all of those things.
Beautiful, man. Hey, thank you for taking some time out to talk to Neon Jazz today. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the album and the return to the stage.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. Good luck to you as well.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in San Francisco, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Russell for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.